simply as an icon. I can paste it in my project and I'm good to go. So I highly recommend this. It's a free software, cross-platform. And if you're constantly working with icons, I think it's a no-brainer. Just go ahead and get it. Now, images. This is a pretty broad subject because the images you'll be using are directly tied to the text content, right? But as a general rule, try and stay away from stock photos as much as possible. Instead, talk to your client and try and get real pictures. So instead of, for example, showing some just random stock photos of fancy offices and the people working in them, get pictures of the real office of the business and the real people working there. You want to be genuine, right? Of course, stock photos have their place. When you want to display an image that's representing a broad picture of your business type, like, say, landscaping, you can get away with grabbing a stock photo or two. The point is, try and keep it as real as possible. It's very jarring, at least for me, to see, for example, a business website that shows, stock businessmen, with fake smiles, shaking hands or pretending to explain something on their laptop screen. Just don't get me started on that. Keep it real. All right, so let's see what we have learned from this lesson. Icons should be meaningful and use a consistent style throughout. Some icons work just fine by themselves, for example, social icons, but usually you want to pair them with text. Use stock photos sparingly and avoid the cheesy, overused cliché ones. Whenever possible, use photos that are provided by the client. Keep it real. And with that, we conclude the initial theory part of this course. Now it's time to roll our sleeves and get to work. And we'll start by looking at common patterns. If you're confused by the term common patterns, well, it's actually very simple. So a pattern is something that's repeating itself, right? And in web design, a pattern is a solution to a common problem. Example, let's say you want to display multiple blocks of similar content in a very small area. How do you do that? Well, the answer would be tabs, right? So tabs, because they're very effective, became the solution to this very common problem. They became a common pattern, okay? So for the next 18 or so lessons, we'll look at some of these common patterns. We'll try to define them. We'll take a look at some real-world examples, so what other people are using these patterns for, and then we'll apply that pattern to our project. Ready? Let's start with headers. Before we design a header, let's look at what it is. A website header is usually the top section of a web page that contains the logo, navigation menu, a call to action, and optionally a search form. Now, this is a generic definition and it depicts a typical header. Because of that, you can distort this structure and adapt it to your needs. So for example, maybe you don't have a search form in the header. That's totally fine. Maybe the call to action and the navigation is hidden or are hidden under a menu button. Also, headers are typically horizontal, but they can also be vertical. And I think that as long as that top area of a web page contains a logo or some kind of brand identifier and a navigation, it can be considered a header. Now, let's take a look at some real-world examples and see the commonalities, but more importantly, the differences. We're going to start with one of my favorite websites, that's Stripe. And here we see a very simple header. We have the logo, the navigation, which looks fantastic, by the way, and also the call to action. Now, some people say that this area here is also part of the header. Personally, I call this the hero area, so it's something separate. But there are those who say that the entire area that's above the fold, or in this case, from here to the top, that's part of the header. They might be right. I don't think there's an exact definition of where a header should start and where it should end. Personally, I just consider a header the very top area of the website. Let's go to the next website for Adidas. Now this has a slightly more complex header. We of course see the logo, the navigation. Here we have a search bar, and we also have some distinct controls for the shop, because this also has a web shop. So we can see a link to probably the user account or the profile, the list of favorites, and the cart. This header also features some extra links here for various sections of the website, and also kind of an information or a promotional bar right here at the top with offers, and then some information about shipping and returns, and also another promotional bit here. So yeah, very similar to the one that we saw on Stripe, but also very different because it features a lot more elements. Next, we have the header from Dribbble. And here again, we have the logo and navigation, but also a search bar, a call to action, and also controls or links to access various sections of the website. So as you can see, the headers kind of change their structure depending on the type of website they're being displayed on, but at their core, they feature roughly the same elements. Here's another example from KBD Fans. Search, logo, shop, links, and then main navigation. And then also an announcement bar right here on the top, just like we saw on Adidas. Next up, let's take a look at the Amazon header. So again, a lot of stuff crammed into here, but with some of these headers, you can really see the main focus or the main purpose of that. And in the case of Amazon, it's this big search bar here. So they want people to use this header to search for stuff on their website. And again, roughly similar structure: logo, navigation, search, cart, so web shop elements. And here we also have a language switcher. Pretty interesting. Next, we have the header for Envato elements. Again, we can see where the focus is on the navigation and also on the search, right? So it's much more beneficial to have a big search form on a website like this, where you go to find certain elements, certain assets and stuff, rather than using a very small search field like we do in Dribbble. Next, we have the website of Simon Getz. Pardon me if I mispronounced your name, Simon. So here we don't really have a header, but instead we have this bit here, which kind of acts like a header, but it also acts like a hero area. So it's kind of a mix between the two. We don't really have a navigation here. We just have the brand identifier, which is the name. And then we have a description of who that person is and what they do. So this is actually a really, really cool website. So as you can see, not all websites need that header with logo, navigation, and call to action. You can distort that structure and adapt it to your needs, as I was saying. Here's another website. Now this features a vertical header. And, it's part vertical, actually, part horizontal, because we have the logo here, horizontal, but the rest is here, vertical. And we have some links here for contact and projects, and then a link to the menu, and then some social media icons. So this is a pretty unusual use for a header. And finally, we have this website for Irene Studio. It's probably pronounced differently in French, but this is a very simple header. We have the logo and then a menu button, which if we press, it's going to show us the menu. And technically, this kind of modal window that's being presented to us here is also part of the header, because it shows us the navigation, some links here. We have a language switcher. So even though, it's not your typical header that's displayed horizontally like this, I believe that it's still part of the header because it contains the navigation. So there you go, a few examples of headers, how they're being implemented in some real websites, and hopefully that gave you some inspiration for creating your own. All right, let's see some key takeaways. A website header is usually the top section of a web page that contains the logo, navigation menu, a call to action, and optionally a search form. A header is highly customizable and can hold other types of content. Headers can also be vertical. All right, so now that we have a general idea of what a header is and what we can do with it, let's go ahead and create one for our project. That's coming up. To design the header, I'll use the wireframe as a starting point, and because I'm working in Figma, I'll be using the auto layout feature pretty heavily, but don't worry, I'll explain how it works as we're building stuff with it. So let's go. So I created a new page in Figma where I placed all the wireframes, and this should be your starting point as well. And what I'm going to do is simply copy the index page, go to my design page, and paste it in. So now I can work directly on the wireframe, right? I think this is much easier because you make the wireframe in Figma and then you copy it into your final design page and you start working directly on it. You don't have to recreate any element. It's all there. All you have to do is play around with colors, typography, spacing, and sizing, which is pretty awesome. So let's start with the logo. I'm going to delete this one, and I'm just going to paste in the logo. I'm going to choose 32 pixels as its height. Remember the 8-point system, yeah? And then I need to know where I'm going to position this logo from the edges, right? So I'm going to bring up my rulers, Shift R, and I'm going to drag a ruler to 64 pixels. 64, like that. And then I'll just align the logo to that ruler. Next, what do we have? We have the menu, About Me, and Contact. Now, I already created a frame with auto layout for this menu, as you can see here. But let me show you exactly what that does. So let's say that I have two elements, right? This and this, two text elements. And I want to position them in the same group so they're perfectly aligned. And they also have a consistent spacing between them. Now, if I were to create a simple group with these, with Command G, whenever I would change one of them, nothing would happen really. The first link would just overlap the other one. And I can also, move these around and nothing really would change. The group would just resize along with them. But with auto layout, things are very different. So let's select these two again. Let's ungroup them. And with them selected, I'm going to click on the plus under auto layout. You can also go to Object, Add Auto Layout, or Shift A. And that's going to create a separate frame for these two elements. And then I can go in here and I can say, okay, I want 16 pixels or maybe 32 pixels between elements.